Hey guys, it's yet another IPXO webinar, and today we actually going to do a myth busting. I would like to present my guest today, who's Dr. Raffaele Sommese from University of Twente. And unfortunately, today we are not able to get hold of Rajiv Chandra, who was also planning to participate in the webinar, and who is actually a finance director of Virgin Media O2. But I'm sure that we're going to have a very fun discussion with Raffaele. So great to have you here, Raffaele.
Thanks a lot, and great to be here. Quickly introduce myself. I'm Raffaele from the University of Twente. I'm assistant professor, and happy to be here and have this fun discussion with you.
Sounds good. Well, and as usual, co-founder at IPXO Vincentas Grinius. So why don't we start from a very interesting piece that you actually guys did recently? You conducted a research around the IP leasing and the abuse and whatnot, but actually revealed some interesting things. So perhaps you would like to enlighten a little bit more about your research.
Yes, so we recently did two pieces of research, two papers that one is already published in press and one is soon to be published. It's accepted, but soon to be published. The first one was conducted from my PhD student Bernard again, with some colleagues at University of Twente and some colleagues at CADA. And the other set piece of research was done in collaboration with other folks at University of Twente, and is about the anti-piracy platform in Italy. And both have implication for IP leasing. In the first paper, in particular, we looked to the problem of abuse in the IP leasing space, and we looked, for example, we compared how much likely is IP address belonging to a IP leasing space ending up in blocklisted list of IP address compared to like normal used space. We found some interesting results. We found that that's sometimes it's like up to 3 times more often we see behavior of abuse, and we see behavior of abuse also popping out during the leasing, and sometimes even before the leasing or after the leasing. That sometimes makes a bit difficult to define, was because of the leasing or was because of the nature of the address and nature of the company that was leasing the address, or for example someone that was leveraging then the company for that purpose. And instead, the other research goes more into the direction where we analyze this Italian platform called Piracy Shield. This platform is a platform where the owner of the copyright owner for live football stream in Italy can issue request of block of IP address space, and basically they can request a block of certain IP address if they, or a certain FUDN if they suspect that there is illegal streaming going on that address, on that space. And one interesting thing that we did also with help of IPXO is that we analyzed how much of the leasing address are in this address space, because the consequences are far-reaching in the moment that these address, for example, get released to other customers that then do not have connectivity towards Italy because these addresses are blocked permanently in Italy. So that's more or less a general overview in 2 minutes of these two works.
And that actually helped to connect Rajiv.
That's great.
So we have, there you go. See how live we are here.
Yeah, and part of a tech and media company activity shouldn't be an issue, but it is. So really apologize for being late to the party, but very happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sounds good. So let me introduce you again, Rajiv Chandra, Finance Director, Virgin Media O2. Glad to have you here. Right. So just to kind of recap, Raffaele just was talking about the research that they have conducted around IP leasing, abuse, privacy, and all that. So we have really interesting two parties. Yeah, well, actually, three parties. And let's talk about some myth busting. So perhaps, we definitely going to touch more on your research piece, Raffaele. But now I would like to touch from a different angle. Rajiv, what was the intention, or let's say the motivation for enterprise like Virgin Media O2 to start monetizing the IP addresses?
Yeah, I think Vincentas, we've had several discussions on this over the past few months. Look, for a company like Virgin, there are a few factors that are, of course, always fair and responsible with use of assets. So where there are assets that provide connectivity services like IPv4s, we want to make sure that we can put them in good use. So that was one. So monetizing or utilizing spare capacity is always something that's on the radar. The second thing is, look, we invest heavily in networks, and companies that are either network builders or owners realize that first we invest in assets, we want to make sure that they remain liquid. There's where there's high demand, we can at least sort of realize value from these assets. Are such intangible assets. I think we also want to make sure that there is flexibility. So sometimes, a lot of companies in the past would have sold their rights to use IP addresses. We want to make sure, as a company that's always growing, looking for new opportunities, we don't permanently lose access to those addresses. So I think IPXO provided us with a great opportunity to have flexibility whilst also retaining ownership. And that was really important to us. There is also, of course, lots of discussions around how long IPv4 addresses will be in use. I think they are part of critical network infrastructure. So we don't want to, at least I feel, personally, we don't want to be in a position where we don't have enough IPv4 addresses. So leasing or for the short term allows us to retain access, but also have reputable use, which is very, very important.
And combining Raphael's research and your kind of intentions on monetizing IP addresses, what risks and compliance consideration you kind of took into the account? What do you think we, as a community members, should consider, or let's say implement on giving a better kind of observability of the leasing IP addresses? What could be your recommendations on that?
My largest recommendation would be enable more transparency in the ecosystem. That means right now we have like several research techniques that we developed to identify IP leasing, IP leased address. What we need is really something that is standardized, where we can know that an address space has been leased. So when we face an address on the internet, we can know that that address space has been leased. We can know who is the entity that is leasing that IP address. We can know who is the IP broker, and we can know who leased that IP address and for how long, which is the period of time that that IP address has been leased. This is super relevant because this enables us to clearly define the ownership of an address space for a certain period of time, and clearly creates point of contact if something bad happens, abuse or things like that. Right? Because what IP leasing created is sort of a liquid market. I mean, for years and years, we thought that IP address and IP address block are sort of static resource and were allocated to people for chunk of years. And even, yes, okay, there was IP transfer market, but was not that fast. Instead, IP leasing enables also people to have address space for a shorter period of time, and we don't have a lot of visibility into this. That's, I think, one important thing, one good recommendation that I can give to the IP brokers and to the RIR, to come with something that enable visibility into this, because this will have also side effect. This will, for example, enable blacklist provider, will enable threat intelligence providers to know when the boundaries of certain abuse or certain malicious activities happens, so they can stop to block a certain resource. If a illicit address goes to someone else, there's no reason to stop to block that address anymore. And the same, for example, of this Italian platform, where they block the address forever. If they would have like a way to have a knowledge about, oh, the address changed ownership, they can perform more active action in unlocking this address and avoiding that, for example, new customer of the leased address space will face this challenge. And these will actually be an even better position than the current traditional IP transfer market, because this will give you a way to go after and clean basically the address space after certain a lease ends, if something better.
So can we kind of summarize that whatever it's a platform, whatever it's a third party or the actual IP holder, they have to take into consideration the KYC factor, that they should understand the whole picture of customers to whom they are leasing the IP addresses. The second, what I heard from you is basically the constantly changing information, who is geodata, ISN, those dynamic things, that let's say if someone's lease the IP addresses, then, and they stop leasing them, and then someone releases those, so that constantly we would have the updated information. So all that definitely should be considered, and I think from our perspectives, it's for us no-brainer to kind of make the IP leasing a more sustainable. So Rajiv, are you with us already?
Can you guys hear me okay now? Excellent. Thank
Very
you.
well, very well. Okay, so let's get back to Rajiv now.
Second point.
So Rajiv, what was your risk and compliance considerations, whatever VMO2 was evaluating the IP monetization?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, Vincentas. So the first is, look, we know there's finite supply. We know that the supply has run out. We didn't want to permanently lose access to these addresses. I think that's a very important consideration. I think for every network builder, we are always looking to add customers onto our network, whilst also making sure that we are providing fair, equitable use of assets, infrastructure that we own and have. The few things that we wanted to make sure that we can manage well, if at any point we are leveraging any of our assets. So the first, of course, is risk around who's using those addresses. So we want to work with reputable partners. I think that's extremely important. We also want to make sure, Vincentas, generally that the admin burden is low. Now we are not looking at scale to lease millions of addresses. We don't have as many, but equally we want to make sure that the addresses we do lease out for a period of time can come back to us in a good condition. So if they are blacklisted or if there's any issues with them, when they return to us, they're cleaned up. But also who's responsible for the management of those addresses during that period of time. Those are the sorts of things we would weigh up as pros and cons. So, is it an important part of diversification of revenues? Possibly, maybe for certain telcos, depending on how many addresses they have access to. But equally or more importantly, can it be done by a reputable provider with the flexibility that we desire? So if we think, Vincentas, of growth, when Virgin Media O2 is looking to grow, if we want those addresses back, how do we get them back? One of the major things is we know that IPv6 adoption is taking longer than we hoped for, or we are aware of that there are still lots of areas of change that needs to happen before mainstream IPv6 adoption takes place. Therefore, I believe and we believe that IPv4s will be in play for a long time. So we want security of supply and then balancing it with working with a reputable provider like yourselves.
Thank you, Rajiv, for your kind words. But today we are here for myth busting. So coming back to Raffaele, you mentioned registries, and actually Rajiv also mentioned a few times registries. If we talk about the abuse, can we state that the businesses, or let's say any entities that could have proven kind of procedures on how the IP leasing should be designed to make it more sustainable, can it be that abuse risk could come down to minimum, Raffaele?
So You can for sure reduce abuse risk. And the first important thing, something you mentioned earlier, is KYC. Because doing a strict KYC, requiring identity documents, requiring proof of company, that the company that is leasing the address space is a legitimate company, doing due diligence, that's an important initial chunk. Because the main problem that exists, and I'm taking here a parallel with the DNS world that I'm also working with. For example, in the DNS world, a huge problem that we have is that everyone in the world can register a domain name. And you need to provide little to none identity to register a domain name. On paper, you need to provide a lot of information. In reality, you need to provide little to none identity to register a domain name. And this leads basically to a lot of abused domain that get registered day by day. You can end up in the same situation with IP leasing if you don't do the proper due diligence. So the first step is to right amount of KYC, right amount of due diligence, and ensure that the company that are leasing the address space are not by themselves the primary perpetrator of abuse, but also they don't then resell the service to people that then can leverage them for abuse. So treat the fact that there are companies that provide the service to third party that can do abuse, to company that can do abuse directly as the same way. So be a bit more strict in when you receive, for example, a complaint. So there is the part where you can you can be more strict in approving users, but you can be also more strict in when an abuse complaint comes in, what you do, how do you handle that customer, what is your yellow card or red card, for example, for saying that a customer is not welcome at
Severity levels.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's relevant, and that's again exposing the information. I'm the broker, I'm the entity. If the company do not answer, I'm the entity to contact for handling future abuse complaints. That's a super helpful information for the operator of CERTs, of operator of threat intelligence, because they can talk to a reliable party that will handle their abuse complaint.
You touched a very interesting point here. Like for example, all of us three being in Europe, we kind of are pretty happy having RIPE NCC because we have a pretty open community, very dynamic environment. And that actually, I think, is a very good sign for, making the whole IP ecosystem more sustainable. But looking at the other registries, you have even IP leasing as a forbidden form of justification or even the usage, So should we kind of try to forbid the IP leasing as it is, or should we try to kind of make it a more sustainable? And that actually comes down to the registry standpoint. What's your take on that, Raffaele?
So I think we should not forbid but regulate. So I have like a better regulation in meaning that we have a common set of rules that everyone should play. All the IP broker, all the people that lease up address space, and all the people get their address space leased have a common set of rules to play with, and not having an unregulated market. What I feel is that, unfortunately, the rear fortunately, that's the way internet works. The rear has a lot of autonomy, so the rear can decide what they want to do out of their policy. If people in some region of the world feels that they would want address space to be leased, somehow that's a decision that we may need to accept. But I think showing that the market can be regulated in a way where there is no risk of abuse, or the risk of abuse is minimized, as we were saying before, will also incentivize these rear to be convinced of the argument that IP leasing is something maybe we need because of the exhaustion of IPv4, and then basically bring them to the argument that they should not forbid IP leasing, but they should just join the crew and just with common set of rules that will work.
You touched about the regulations. That's an interesting one. In Europe, we always want to regulate everything. If it's AI, let's regulate. If it's personal data, let's regulate it. In my view, why don't we have a set of standards that actually we should follow? for example, extending some sort of the whois, where we could tag, at different types of usages, extend the API, offer PKI, for example, where we could delegate to more parties and trace basically, the end user who's using those IP addresses. Like, for example, from telcos like VMO2, it's also pretty important to understand that they work with trusted partners and that their IP addresses would remain, clean. So all those things, I think, we could definitely even achieve not regulating, but probably extending the technological capabilities of the actual registries. But actually, what you said was right. They have the autonomy.
Don't get me wrong when I say regulation. I don't just mean regulation coming up from top, because regulation should not. It's not something that always needs to come from the top. Regulation is also something that can be a common agreement among parties that works in the environment.
Like Marn's BGP
Exactly,
type of,
Mars.
yeah.
There are many other best practices initiatives where you have like a set of operators that operate in the same field, thinking of the CA browser for certificate transparency, set of operators that operates in the same field, and they want to come up with a good set of rules of a game that they want to play, in this case the IP leasing market, and they say we adhere to that rule. And after a while, that rule becomes sort of the standard or the norm, as you were mentioning. And that also helps brokers to differentiate themselves from the one that are not playing that rules, because that's also important. Because it's good that there are no bad actor in the game, because if you have like a single bad actor, then the RIR and that don't want to allow leasing will just refer to that bad example. So regulation, again, coming from the bottom, coming from an agreement of the party involved, I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's something that will help the development and not stop it. And again, you can do that by also providing standards in changing, for example, the protocol, changing the RIR protocol in exporting more information about the leasing status of a prefix, changing the RPKI in a way that you can subdelegate and having like more visibility inside the RPKI space of if a prefix is delegated or not, but also changing the way how the community perceive the leased space, explaining that there will be like a team of people ensuring that there is, for each IP broker, you have like a CERT incident response team that will handle abuse complaints. So they know that there is someone that will listen to when something happens. They know that there will be someone listening to that complaint, and they know that there will be a standard procedure for doing KYC, for example. That it's sort of agreed. It should not be agreed in the tiny details. I'm also not fan of over-regulation. I think over-regulation is something that stops the business to evolve.
100%, 100%,
But
100%.
Something that can be flexible enough to adapt to the market, to evolve with the market, I think it may be needed and it may be brought up from the operators of the market that are operating the fair game right now.
I agree. And actually, within our half an hour of conversation, we already busted 3 myths, about the abuse. We just need a little that much on making IP leasing less abusive. And it's actually not even about, us being IPXO, and addressing those issues. But I think, the whole community should be aware of that, because it's not even the brokers that actually are making the, abuse or perhaps, even providing the IP addresses to their customers. But I think, and the actual providers that are leasing IP addresses directly to their customers should be aware of how to actually handle those things. It's very important to actually have a common ground on what we understand as the abuse. Because what we saw as well, that not every party understands the abuse priority equally. And that's also, we should have a common sense on that. Okay, moving forward, Rajiv, I would like to come back a little bit to Virgin Media O2, if I may. Then you guys were evaluating the case about monetizing IP addresses. What was like your primary top, not the goals, but more like a priorities to kind of understand that this is a feasible option to go with?
Yeah, I think there's a few different facets, Vincentas, that we discussed. One is, look, I believe, personal opinion, that leasing is a good thing. I think it allows businesses, especially new businesses, to invest their capital in the right way. So, for example, for network builders, they may not wish to purchase IP addresses. Short-term leasing might be more beneficial for them. So I think providing access to network infrastructure that is important for the development of the internet for SMEs, but also large enterprises scale, is important to me. I'm sure it's of course important to Virgin Media O2. I think that was one consideration. So if we do have assets available that can help with the advancement of the internet, then should we be holding on to them in the sense that we may need them in, say, 18 months from now or 12 months from now. So providing access with the flexibility of having the addresses back as and when we need them through the IPXO platform, I think was really important. So I think that's one. So not permanently losing access to assets that we feel will be valued for a long period of time. I think that's one. I think the second bit, as you mentioned, the fact that we'd like to better understand not just the regulatory impact, but also how abuse complaints are managed, handled, etc. Now, a large ISP like us and several others in the UK, we have functions that do that for us on when we think about providing access to our consumer base. But the fact that you know a platform like IPXO can take care of that in a considered way was again very important. So reducing the admin burden, having flexibility, and of course realizing some value from these assets that are otherwise not being used. So we're in general, compared to the investments we make in our network, it might not be a significant sum of money, but it still is valuable. And so from our perspective, we want to make sure assets are efficient, they are used in the manner they are intended to be used. So it's a good opportunity for people who may not be using addresses constantly to start thinking about how they can leverage or make them financially viable. So those were some of the considerations we had. But again, as we said, we've discussed this for a period of time. The other fact that some other businesses have chosen to sell rather than lease was also something that networks will consider. But I think in our case, leasing proves to be a much better model.
Thank you, Rajiv. And you see, one of the things what I actually wanted to kind of expand a little. There are, conversations going on that, let's say, if you are in LATAM region, you can only use Latin American IP addresses from LATNIC. If you are in, Asian region, you can use only APNIC's IP addresses. I think a BGP was created basically to use any of the IP addresses, no matter from what region they are. That's like a first thing. And the second thing that when the registrars were introduced, they all were introduced with certain amount of IP addresses per region. But we see that the regions themselves, they are evolving differently. Like, for example, right now we see a huge growth in Asian market. We might see, a huge growth later on in Latin America or even Africa. And I think that, please correct me if I'm wrong, but in my opinion, that no matter from what region IP addresses are, they should be allowed, or they actually can be used in any region you want. Raffaele, what's your take on that?
Challenging argument, because if you ask the people of region of an underserved region of the world, if you want them, the answer may be we got allocated less address space at the begin with, and we may end up with company trying to predate, if you want, address space. For sure, there is a lot of mobilities on the internet nowadays. There is a lot of changing in the request, and the world is also changing. There is a more requests, for example, now from Asia. Hopefully, in a couple of years, we will start to see more requests also from the African region. It's a bit challenging to define the boundaries of where an address should be used. As you said, BGP was originally intended to you get an address used whatever you want. My feeling is that this is more a personal opinion. I think that there should be some sort of safeguard to avoid that some region will end up with people in some region will end up to not having access to address space at all. But there should be also enough room for mobility in a way that this address can be shifted a bit here and there. Unfortunately, this is also a bit of a policy of RIR. So this is something that where RIR needs to agree. That should be like a sort of liquid transfer of resource from one to the other, and that should take a role of overseeing where this operational usage, when this operational usage basically match then the underlying request for that specific region.
You see, I get your point, and I partially agree. Like, for example, the company like VMO2, they started to monetize their IP addresses, and those IP addresses are everywhere right now. The registry has no policy and does not forbid any movement of IP addresses out of a region, which is great. My point when I actually told about the registries with the initial allocated resources, that the environment changed. I can see, for example, an interesting cases where companies in the US are using their IP addresses all over the place. And that's because they have edge locations, and because they are moving the environment to any different locations, etc., etc. And in my view, that from a perspective of how mobile the IP address should be, I think it should be mobile enough to fulfill the market needs. Because as Rajiv mentioned, and we know that perfectly, that IPv6 adoption is moving at snail speed, or perhaps in some of the countries stalled completely. And for us, probably it makes sense to even think about the new technologies, the way how we should not even bother about IPv6 adoption, because I'm kind of feeling, that we're gonna see the new technologies coming before we see IPv6 adopted.
I still have the secret hope that certain IPv6, but that's academic hope more than technology hope. So no, I agree with your point. The problem is that at a certain point you need safeguards. So I agree that there should be a bit more of a mobility in the market, because at the end of the day you need that more mobility, because the world has more mobility inside these inner working mechanisms. But you should have safeguard, because again, a parallel with the DNS world that I think it's interesting, because always DNS gets abused more and end up with a more strange situation. In the DNS world, there are a couple of islands in the middle of Pacific that have very interesting top level domain, or like .tk or the .gb for Gamon, and all these islands got people that went there and bought basically the right of registering domain name for that TLD, and then start to monetize, start to sell. Some of them start to offer this domain name for free. Long story short, there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of not nice behavior towards the country and the government of this island. to the extent that at the end, the original owner, the original people that were delegated this chunk of this finite resource, if you want, that was the domain name space, didn't got that much of advantage. Now, in the world we have IPv4. We know IPv4 is a finite resource. We sort of distributed at the beginning of the internet in different IIR. I agree that maybe at current stage, this may not reflect the current needs of the market. And with leasing, you may solve a bit this imbalance of the market because you can lease and use this address in different regions of the world. But you still need someone that oversees that this doesn't go too far in the direction where then the regional people that were assigned to this address space, the original region that were assigned to this address space, get damaged. So you need to seek always a balance. That's my point.
Yeah, and actually, a very interesting case here. I think again, I'm a true believer in technological advancements and employing technology in kind of and giving more access. The technology is much has much more advantage than just regulation and policy. And a good case is again about VMO2, where they haven't kept those IP addresses, idle. Instead, they enabled those IP addresses to the others that actually in need of them. The platforms themselves, I think they should become a much more smarter on the decision making. Now, talking about the abuse from the domain system, I think, Raphael, it's a different beast. The DNS is a different world, but it actually comes down to the IP address by the end of the day.
I agree, but I mean the DNS is more tied to country, where for the RIR you are more tied to region. But at the end of the day, it's you see that from this case of this small TLD, they face the same challenge. At a certain point, I agree that everyone on the world, for example, you enable everyone on the world to have an IP address, can have access to that address space, for example, go on the platform and lease the address space. But some region of the world may have less resource to lease an address space. Maybe something that may be a convincing argument is also having some sort of differentiating pricing, if you want, for different region of the world. Because that's also something that enables a bit more of fairness in the allocation of resources. Because the original idea in mind was that IP address was not all days of the internet, not a resource to be monetized. But then over the years, I mean, we live in a capitalistic society, IP address become a resource to monetize. And the safeguard in place are just to make sure that some region of the world will not end up to not have address space just because they don't have the resource to lease or buy the address space. We want to avoid that.
So I think that it's definitely addressable with a few tweaks from the technological standpoint. That's for sure. And companies like VMO2 definitely could trust IP leasing option to go with. And of course, talking about the whole abuse topic, it's endless. It's endless because the more you advance, the more sophisticated the abuse becomes. So, in my view, that it's definitely not gonna end at all. It's gonna be there all the time.
Yeah.
All what we have to do is basically, take the necessary measures to minimize it. And as you mentioned, Raphael, and this is what we do, the KYC, strict compliance, the proactive checks, and visibility of what is happening is definitely important. So to gain that trust for that market, basically. And then I think that we definitely going to see more and more companies like VMO2 considering those type of options like IP monetization. Because by the end of the day, I think, Rajiv, you would agree with me that, or perhaps not, but you definitely have plans to scale your network. And for you, a monetization is is a temporary solution to kind of have those dormant IP addresses monetized while you actually, expanding or grow.
Yeah, I think a few different things. So Vincent, as of course you pointed, look, is it the right thing to allow for dormant addresses or addresses that are temporarily not in use to either be monetized or to be used by other entities? Of course, we would normally want to make sure we can enable that. I think the other bit, I of course won't be commenting on any regulation or area specific guidance, but we want to make sure that everything that any telco is doing in terms or any large enterprise is doing in terms of monetization of assets have the right guardrails. So abuse complaints to a minimum, know your customer, following the right compliance through every single internet registry is very important to us. So I think particularly because you mentioned VMO2 as we're always looking to as a business grow, this might be temporary in terms of at some point we want the addresses back in use within the network, but it's a good opportunity in that interim to utilize the addresses, which is why they're there, right? We want to make sure that we can further access and provide access to critical network infrastructure that should be in use, and secondly, not lose access to them permanently. That's the biggest worry we have, because primarily of the fact that IPv6 adoption is taking quite long, and we expect IPv4 addresses to be in use for a long time. So I think it's here to stay in different formats. Monetization, it might be through selling, it might be through leasing, but on a positive note, I think it provides entities with choices and options, both people that are looking to monetize in the short or the long run IP addresses, but equally entities that might not be able to afford outright purchases. We saw for a few years prices of IP addresses had risen significantly. They are balanced now a little bit or have come down slightly, but equally large capital outlays sometimes deter organizations, and so leasing also provides respite in that way. So not to comment on region specific arguments, not one for me, more one for Rafa and you, Vincentas. But from my perspective, I think the positive view here is, look, we are providing access to critical infrastructure that is otherwise not in use, and that is helpful for everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just checking if we have any questions from the audience. If not, then we actually going to do some closing remarks. So, summary of today's webinar: IP leasing can be considered as a safe option with a precaution, with the attention to details on the KYC, on the abuse management, proper abuse management, and having that common sense on what is really abuse is. From the future proof of IP leasing case for any enterprise and telco, it's definitely a big case that can be explored and enabled, and of course then it's done right. And the other thing is that what I would say as a closing remark, I think that we definitely have to put more energy in developing the registry environment for changing technologies and changing kind of ways how the internet evolves these days. Because look, back in 1981, nobody knew that internet was gonna be so big as we have in today's world, right? When IP address was introduced. Yeah, and even guys who actually decided to make, those 4 octets with 3 numbers, they looked at the population, which was 4.5 billion IP addresses. So they thought, what, one computer per household, it's gonna be more than enough. But actually, it's not. Rajiv, um, what would you like to say to the other parties that also considering IP leasing and monetization options?
Yeah, I think it's very important to consider a balanced view, your needs of the organization versus the space you've got, and how you're looking to either grow or what the portfolio of businesses looks over time. So it's important to consider that. I think we're in a very interesting landscape where AI, the growth in data centers, cloud computing is taking off exponentially. I think that has its own merits and considerations that we need to think about. I think through the registries, there are options where there is temporary transfer of addresses, etc., that may be utilized for the or sub-delegation, etc., for leasing that is secure. And again, considering the right partner is critical, because you want to make sure as an organization that this may not be the core business for you, have the right abuse KYCs, due diligence, legal compliance methodologies in place. I think we have to balance out those things, and in the end, if the focus is to monetize addresses that are not being used, I think that's a positive thing, both, as we said, for the lessees and the lessors. Also, very very important to keep an eye on regulation. So we will want to make sure that everyone abides by whatever the registries are allowing or not, both in the case of leasing and selling, etc. It's especially very important for me within my role at finance at VMO2, but it'll be the same for any other entity that owns or is looking to buy or lease addresses. I think, as Vincent, as you mentioned, the framework exists to be able to do that, but you have to consider all of those things: growth and your utilization over time, the right partner. Why are you looking to monetize? What's the ambition, etc. Are a few things I would think about.
Thank you, Rajiv. Raffaele.
Yeah, my final comment would be I think IPXO, we worked a lot together in the past, but for this boat paper, I think the most valuable thing is also try to collaborate with the academic community, try to communicate with the research community and with the threat intelligence responder, try to get as much insight as you can. We are here to help. We all want a better internet at the end of the day. And I really had a positive experience in the past working with you and investigating, for example, cases of where we see abuse, or, for example, where we see these cases of address blocked in Italy. I think the most important thing was having someone that is responsive. So be responsive, be receiving to the comments that you will get from the RAR, and let's create an environment where it's open to discussion. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. And I think that we definitely should have this open discussion. And the means like IPXO webinar always helps to tackle, those things. So I'm gonna definitely keep on doing those webinars with interesting speakers like you guys. And thanks a lot for participating in today's webinar. It was really interesting for our audience to learn from you guys more about your findings and your considerations. Since we already Raffaele and Rajiv work together, it's definitely a pleasure to have you on IPXO webinar, which is really awesome. And thank you very much for your thoughts. I think we definitely busted some of the myths, and I think those myth-busting conversations should land in constructive conversation where we can actually get the right decisions and the right solutions to develop our future of the internet, because I think it's very important to have global connectivity, global communication, and definitely not attached to the regions only. So that was like my final thoughts about it. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks a lot, Rajiv. Thanks a lot, Raffaele. It
Thanks for
was
having
really
us.
great. And the next webinar we're gonna have in November. Stay tuned for more announcements. We actually going to talk about a single source of truth, where we're going to have very interesting speakers, and we're going to talk actually about very relevant conversation, how companies should defragment their IP addresses and optimize their networks to utilize it as efficient as possible. This is also very important on tackling the abuse. Okay, guys, thank you very much
Thank you.
for your time.
Thanks, Vincentas.
Thank you very much.